So what I asked you to do, has anyone actually looked at what? Because there was a framework for management, leadership, and change that I asked you to have a look at, and I believe I did on Moodle. Any bells?
I'm sorry, I didn't look into it.
No, it's fine. I feel a bit sorry for you, Jay, because I think you're like the voice of the nation. It's either you or Tamsin, isn't it? Tamsin?
I forgot.
You what? Sorry.
Forgot.
Oh, I'm just grateful you do. I'll tell you what, though, Jay, we're going to be meeting in person soon.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, first of September, we're going to do a portfolio building session.
Yeah.
CMI coming in, doing some instructions, going to plan it all properly. We're in Elm Bank, so if you've got so that it's got parking all around it, so it shouldn't be an issue. And also, it's before like officially students go back anyway, so I think it will work really well timing wise. And then Kelly will be. I've asked Kelly, and she's free that day. I just need to do like a planning session, so. So I think because they want us to have some like face-to-face contact, and actually I think for the sessions, because we're recording them, that most of them work well online. But if we do a few, maybe depending on how the portfolio building session goes, we might do a second one. And then if that just helps you get your head around it and prepare for the endpoint assessments, I think that'd be well worth doing.
Yeah, cool.
So that's the plan. Okay, so let me share with you what. So I'm going to whistle through the talk content just to make sure that we've got time for the one-to-ones, but also that we are covering the what you need to know. So let me. Joe, what company are you doing?
Am I on mute?
No, I'm listening.
No, so I'm thinking I'm somewhere between two at the moment.
Okay.
Either Amazon again or maybe Apple.
Oh, okay. Tom Ainsley, you're doing Apple, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm doing Apple.
Okay. A bit of interaction. That's as far. Is it worth doing?
Yeah, there's a few bits and pieces on them, but I'm sure if you choose like a big company, you'll just find probably the similar information.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Is the other Tom Main? Are you doing Amazon? Someone was doing Amazon, weren't they?
I don't think he's here yet. I haven't seen his name on the.
Oh, it was here last week. Tell you what, you're all doing very well on your assignments. Don't let me down. No, keep going. Over the summer, I'll get 303 set up as well, and I'll get everything available for you then. So I'm not suggesting for any minute that anyone would want to look at anything in advance. But if you did, Tamsin, you like to, don't you? I'll get it ready for you, so you can start seeing the assignments and things. Just if you want to, anyway.
Emma, I don't know whether it's just me, but you're not very loud, and I'm anyway because I've got an ear infection. So
sorry, I think it's because I don't put my microphone at the right angle sometimes, and then if I do, it's. Oh, Kieran's here. Just want to miss out. Kieran, happy holidays. I hope you're enjoying them. How are they?
They're all right, yeah.
Good. Well, yeah, it must really feel like it. Thank you for joining us anyway. Tamsin, can you hear me any better?
Yeah, I can now, thank you.
Yeah, it's user error. Sorry. Right. Okay. So, I'll just go through the material and assume that no one's looked at it then, rather than expecting you to have done it. Make sure I've got. So sorry, I've got a couple of slide decks. I have one with absolutely everything for the full session, so I'll do those. So what I've tried to do is connect. So we've had like a key part of this assessment in order to develop an organisation. A key part of development is change, and obviously change is something in this degree which is an underpinning theme, as it should be. So no, but it can feel like it's sort of we're always doing it. But what I hope is I do, rather than just getting a load of slides and saying, right, I'm just going to deliver them to you, I do go through and cherry pick which I think are going to be most useful and which might add a new slant to it. So I have tried to almost like go through a process where I curate the slides and just, so I'm trying to look with this, we're trying to look at it from the perspective of like why change is necessary to ensure that the organisation grows, thrives, and does what it needs to do. And I think with your assessments, you're looking at a case study and you're going to have, if we go back to the iceberg that you looked at in your first assignment, we've got the above, so we've got the bits that are visible, and they're the things that we can use to sort of frame what's going on in terms of what might be happening. But there's also going to be quite a lot of things where we're going to have to talk about potential approaches, because unless we can get access, that's why I was asking Tom, you know, what you're finding about Apple, because you know there's going to be certain things that you're just not going to be able to find in terms of how they're approaching change, for example. So with that, don't think everything's got to be supported by evidence. What you can do is build in your I don't know, like your feelings on how it could be managed best and how they could respond to things. So it's part fact is almost sounds wrong. It's part evidence based in terms of what we can find out about the organisation, and then potentially where they need to move to. So again, that can be evidence based on things that we know about the industry, or you know, so we're not, it's not all sort of made up. But then part of it is also going to be, so based on those concrete things that we've got, what can we, based on the theories, our understandings of what options they've got and what we know about all the organisation, how can they move forward based on the theories and models? So that can't be evidence-based because we don't actually know, because that's part of their intellectual property, isn't it, in terms of how they're actually achieving it. So does that sort of make sense in terms of where you might have gaps, but what you can do about those gaps? So you sort of, it's almost like on a recommending sort of point of view, based on what I understand and what the challenges are. These are what we presume, you know, these are the options they could have to move forward. I'll tell you one of the biggest examples, I think, or one of the best examples of organisations where it comes to predicting the future that they should have got better. WH Smith. WH Smith could have been like an Amazon, couldn't they? Because if you think about Amazon, they started off, it was very much on books, wasn't it? That's my recollection of it. And then it sort of very quickly, you know, they went down just to become everything. And you just think WH Smith really missed a trick on that, because I imagine they had a conversation somewhere about the internet, and one of them probably said, you know, it's just never going to take off. And there are so many, but there are also things that we've heard about, like sort of 4D televisions, things like that. They haven't taken. So there's trends that people, organisations should have really capitalised on, and then there's ones that they've really missed out on, aren't there? Can anyone think of any examples where you think that organisation should have nailed it and instead they didn't?
Was it like Blockbuster when they?
I was thinking exactly the same. Yeah, because they just and I am very conscious of our like huge age gap when I'm giving examples, but I don't know if any of you remember Netflix used to do DVDs through the post. Does anyone remember that?
Netflix did.
Honestly, they did. So you used to have a subscription, and you'd either have 2 at a time or more than that. And then they shifted. I don't know if they were even branded as Netflix, but it was them. And then they sort of phased that out and became obviously like a digital service. So whilst Blockbuster were like going out of business because they didn't realise, I don't know if they didn't realise or what it is, but this is where if you don't get it right to the level that you need to get it right, you haven't got a business, have you? And the level of disruption seems to happen quite quickly, doesn't it? So I think what happened was with Blockbuster, because they got a postal service with Netflix, so it was more accessible, but it was still in the sort of physical domain. But then obviously the streaming capabilities improved, and so they were able to phase that out. So actually it wasn't about having 2 at any time, it was literally, it was as much as you could, you know, because you've just got access to everything. And then sort of the digital bit, because what is Blockbuster, it's just completely gone, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas what was the other big one that went completely different? But Woolworths. Does anyone know what Woolworths is doing now? Because I think it still exists, but I think it's an online business now. Just having a look. It's definitely they've got a supermarket in Australia that's called Woolworths, which is always a bit sort of confusing. Yeah, I don't know. I think because what was Woolworths known for? Do you remember it going out of business, or is that even before your time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it.
Big one in Stratford.
Yeah, and it was the first place that people went to buy their first ever, like, it shows how old it was. Like, it was Pick and Mix, and I think it was where you bought your school uniforms and your first ever probably record. You know, it was sort of that was part of it was part of British, you know, this sort of institution really, part of your rites of passage were always undertaken at Woolworths. So again, but I think we need to be aware that so even though Apple have got such a dominant position, at one point it was the other phone brand with the it was BlackBerry with and they had little keyboards, and they were the phones for business people. So just all I want to put, I sort of just want to sow the seed in your mind, in the sense of actually just because you've got a dominant brand in a sector, things can shift, and even the massive ones. Almost with it, it's almost like an abuse of power, isn't it, really, that they just think they don't need to do anything about it. So when I think this is possibly more leaders in terms of like what level of strategic change we've got. There is at some point change has got to happen, and it's really about what they're going to change, and it is a lot about timing and how they're going to implement it as well. And actually it's risk, isn't it? Because you've got a risk if you change, and then you've got a risk if you don't change as well. So it's a difficult one to know which to back. How would you? Like, if you're thinking about all the opportunities that are available and the direction that things are going in, do you think there's an element of luck in it, like backing the right ones, or what do you know? Do you think it's more scientific than that?
I think data and sort of analytics would help with that.
I think it supports it, and I think it helps. Do you know what, Krishma? I think the challenge we've got is there's some things that until you launch them, you don't get them. Like, you can't understand them. Like, how does that work? Like Airbnb, you know, it's such a different concept that I do agree with you. I think there's a level of sort of data of sort of environmental scanning that we can do, that we can look. And I think particularly when something's not entirely new to market, where we can look at how it went down in a country that might even be similar to ours, that's got a similar infrastructure. I think there is a massive risk when it's totally new to market. And also, if you're totally new to market with something, there's a risk that actually you're not going to do it right. It's not going to take off. I mean, a company that sort of gets it wrong and right, well, there's quite a few brands in that category. Virgin come up with some ideas that are they do very well, but also have come up with a number of ideas. They've launched like a jeans brands before now. They've launched vodka. They've done honeymoons called Virgin Brides, which is just a bit daft. And so they've got some great ones, but they've got some ones that haven't worked. And another company that I think gets it wrong and right is oh God, my short-term memory. I'm so sorry. Dyson. Can you think of any things that Dyson have done that haven't worked out?
Their car.
Yeah, that was and I think they put a lot into that as well, but I think they just wrote it off in the end. But then it's a way of sort of almost sorting their finances a little bit, because you don't pay tax on like research and development, so it's quite a cost-effective you know, and you get credits for doing it. So the car, but I think they've also done other things, like I think they've got like spin dryers, and they've done sort of washing machine. They've done things that just haven't taken off as they thought, because their competence is all around engineering. So they've sort of tried to bring that with some innovations that they just haven't been known for, and the market hasn't been sort of open to, really. So I think we can look at the data, and we can make sort of try and make quite scientific decisions. I think with I think there's also an element of a gut feeling. You know, is it the right time for a market to change? Have we looked at? I'm sure I've shown you some charts, haven't I, with different types of change? Does that make sense? Yeah, so sort of, it's almost like it changes a picture. So it's this idea of whether it's a sort of steady, or whether we go in chunks. And actually, you know, if we chunk it up in terms of a punctuated equilibrium, so do we do like a step changes, or is it about a high level, a high pace of continuous transformation, depending on the nature of the business? And each of those is going to have its different energy levels that are required. It's going to have a different pace, and it's going to shape the organisation. It's going to sometimes lead to change fatigue as well. So we need to consider in terms of like how it is manifested on an individual level. You know, is it the right time to introduce change? What's required in terms of embedding it in the processes and systems, and actually, is it at the core of the organisation? I think it's quite interesting, because you probably gathered by now, I'm quite fascinated by, like, business isn't just business. It's about people and bringing people on board, which is the biggest challenge. And actually, a lot of that is around psychology and how people are responding to change, and the capacity they've got to take change on as well. So we talked a bit last week about mentioned about different forms of power. So we've got different types of change, from this sort of iterative small change to actually transformational change, which sometimes is required to take the business into a new era. But we've also got different ways in which we're going to make that change happen, which can be in terms of the sort of the momentum behind it, and the power to make it happen, whether it's something where everyone's cooperative, or whether it has to have this level. It's quite sinister, I think, the sort of word coercive, but it's about sort of almost how do we get people on that journey? So is it through cooperation? Is it because they're bought into it, or is it through threats, which is the coercive side? And actually, where's it coming from? So is it something that's been suggested on the ground floor, in which case, you know, buy-in might be much easier because it's bottom up, so it's starting to sort of change, and then with that there's ripple effects going upwards? Or is it something that actually is a directive from the top, or is it a mixture? And, you know, how do we, you know, what is, depending on the level of change. So I'll tell you what, it's just a really complicated picture in terms of how we're creating an organisation that's keeping pace, or it's ahead of, because actually, so you've got these different paces that you can go for. If you're behind the curve, you can still have a good business, because the ones that are disrupting the business, that are disrupting the industry, they're paying a huge amount of money and taking a lot of risk in doing that. So if you're first to market in how you're doing things, you will have people that want to work with you because they enjoy that pace, that energy, that reputation of being very exciting in how you're doing it and disrupting. But with that comes significant cost and almost a significant loss because of the level of risk. And then you've got ones that are sort of almost trying to get the pace at the right level, that when the market's ready for it. So they're almost watching the leaders. They might be a little bit behind them in terms of rolling out, but they've got less risk in their strategy, but they're not pioneering. And then you've got ones that are lagging slightly that can still capitalize. And I think of you know, some phone brands, and some of the phone brands that do that may not be very well known in the UK, but actually in developing countries, So I'm supervising an assignment at York St John's in London, which is London campus, with somebody that wants to do technology business in India and wants to sell hardware, so like laptops and phones. But the brands that he will be going for aren't the market leaders. He will be going for ones that are more cost effective, that have benefited from all the leading experience. And actually, for the Indian market, that there's a big potential there. So it isn't necessarily about market leaders being always the best. So just sort of like it's complex, isn't it? But you know, how would you be able to tell where they're going to sit on these? And so on all these continuum that I'm talking about, in terms of whether they're just going to sort of go at a faster pace and be pioneers, whether they're going to try and align themselves to the change in the market, or whether they're going to be followers. What evidence would you look for to know which sort of category your organisation fits in with? So how do you know how quickly they're going to respond, if they're going to be ahead, if they're going to be on trend, or if they're going to be slightly behind but capitalising from the leaders?
Don't you just know though, like taking Tom's company for example, like Apple are the leaders, like they're the ones who are changing the market, and same with like Tesla.
Yeah, Tesla, absolutely, we know. Apple, I would think so, because that's the reputation they've got. I don't know if there's anyone that's more forward thinking than Apple, but it's a really small brand, because they sort of, I don't know, I don't know the market well enough to know if there is anyone that even Apple watches. Apple watches, but Apple is monitoring. Krishna, this comes into, when you were asking about where does Learning Outcome 2 fit into this? And Learning Outcome 2 almost feels it's too good to be true. It's just quite straightforward, really. It's what you did in the first assignment. It's looking at the characteristics, activities, goals, their ethos, their purpose, their vision. I think that gives you an indication, that does, as to where they're positioned. So I think from that, and that's all very factual, really, in terms of researching that, but that will set the scene for the whole assignment. And I think that helps you understand in terms of how they're sitting in their industry, how responsive they're going to be, how fast, how dynamic they are. But I think you're right. I think part of it is a reputation they've built, so it almost feels intangible, doesn't it? But there should be some evidence to back it up. And I do wonder in some industries if there are brands that we just don't know because they're not mainstream, but they are cutting edge and the other brands learn from it. I'm not sure. Okay, thank you. Thanks for responding.
On that point, I just think a lot of the larger brands just take over the smaller brands that are cutting edge anyway, so you don't really get to hear about them.
Yeah, because they don't want you to, actually. So yeah, if they're sort of almost just, yeah. But what do you think, they acquire them, or do you think they actually put them out of business?
Bit of both, probably.
Yeah, I do.
Probably put them out of business in a ethical way, I suppose.
Why, by buying them, or just by?
They buy them out, don't they?
Yeah, acquire them and they just operate as a subdivision or take over their brand entirely. Yeah, because they've got the power. And this part of this is about protecting, and it's about market dominance. Okay, yeah, good points. Thank you. Because I imagine as well, there was someone before, Elon Musk won't have been the first person that thought of electric car. Do you know what I just can't? But do you know what we do? We always create stories, don't we? Because I've done it, right. So I've had a number of like different businesses that I've set up and run, and been quite entrepreneurial and invented products and things. And I did it with pretend like a study website that was about sort of students selling access to reading their assignments, things. And it was meant to be like a big repository. It obviously now would just be completely silly, because if people want to go a route where they're looking at other people's work, they just pay someone to write their assignments, which is absolutely not what I'm endorsing. But I'm just saying, at the time when we launched that, I made a claim that it was the UK's first, and it wasn't. But I tell you what, I got on Radio 4, got on the Working Lunch, I got on the Daily Mail, Radio 1, the news section before 6 o'clock. I was the and finally slot, my business was. So it was like really controversial. The way he did it was by saying you're the first, and actually it's so do you know what I mean? What we know isn't necessarily is the story. It's not necessarily the truth. That's what I'm getting at anyway. So when it comes to leading this change, our managers and leaders have got different roles that they can play. We've got people, so if you think of somebody who's a figurehead in business, give me some names of people who play that role.
Alan Sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he'll be back on the telly soon, won't he? With I like that, The Apprentice. That comes in the autumn, doesn't it? So we've got Alan Sugar. Who else are figureheads?
Richard Branson.
Yeah, and it doesn't. Do you know what? Their business isn't actually. It's licensed, a lot of it, so it's not actually. A lot of the Virgin brands aren't actually Virgins, but what he needs to do is invest in the PR side of that business, because that's where the value is. So yeah, that's a really good example. That's a really good example of almost like smoke and mirrors, really. Any others? Would you say people like Steve Jobs, was he a figurehead, or do you think he was a leader? Or...
More of a leader.
Yeah, he got a personal brand, hadn't he? That was sort of almost, yeah. But I don't know if you've ever heard anything about him. I don't think they were. I think a lot of people that are leaders are not easy to work for. You know, I don't think they're known as the nice guys. But yeah. And then, do you reckon Elon is a leader as well? Then.
I think he might be a bit of both, you know.
Yeah, I think he's a visionary, isn't he? So we've got like, what do they do in terms of like, where are they sitting in terms of their sort of inspirational value interpersonally, and then actually, you know, are they sort of hands-on in terms of almost controlling the process? Are they people who share information, or are they people who are almost at the top level acting as sort of the voice of the company? And then, you know, what's their style in terms of making decisions? Are they ones that are looking at how to make it happen and roll it out, resource allocators? Are they the entrepreneurs, the risk takers, or are they the ones that are looking at what's going wrong and they're sorting it out and handling the disturbances? So we've got, again, all these possibilities, and it isn't a case of everybody fits into one role and that's all they do. It's actually the most successful organisations will be very agile, and the people within it will be skilled in making these changes. So what I wanted you to do was to just in this sort of self-preparation exercise, it was about how do we right, okay, can you give me so one person at a time, we'll just go in each of these quadrants. Can you give me an example in your workplace? Can someone start by giving an example of an organisational wide cultural change? So can you think of something where it's really fundamentally changed the organisation? So quadrant 1.
I know we say this example a lot, but working from home.
No, okay, yes, absolutely. So in terms of transformational leadership, do you think that's absolutely changed the way that people, you know, how has that impacted how people lead or how people are led?
I think it's that having the continued interaction with your team, your managers, other colleagues.
It's a sort of checking in, isn't it, in a very different sort of way, isn't it? And it's how you manage that and build a team spirit in a way that's just alien to how we have worked. No, I think it's a really good example, Krishna. I know it's one that, as you say, it is one that's used a lot because it's so relevant. And actually, in terms of innovation, it's not been done before. It's not something where we've, well, has it? Sort of in some organisations, yeah. And do you think it's happened more where you, at Aston Martin, was it a frequent thing that people were doing beforehand? Like, was it some, or not really?
No, it wasn't something that was common.
Will it be, as the people are able to work more back in the office, will it be something that continues, or do you think it has changed the way that people are going to be working in your organisation, or do you think the change actually will go back to how it was?
I think it will stay.
Yeah, we've actually just introduced a working from home policy as well. So yeah, I think it will stay the same pretty much. But obviously, having that balance of being in office and working from home.
Yeah. Well, it's changed the nature of teaching, hasn't it? Because I know, Jay, you weren't part of the conversation last week, but we did talk about, so it wasn't me just deciding we're going to do the majority of the learning online. We had a discussion around it. And actually, when we started shifting to online learning, I can't imagine anybody would have wanted to carry it on. So I think it has taken a while to embed it, hasn't it? And now it has. It's a case of like, what's the best practice we can learn from this? What are the benefits, rather than just defaulting back to where we came from? Okay, so that's a really good example. Quadrant 2. Anyone come up with an example where you've had in the organisation there's been a large scale structural change? So this might be like how the organisation's structured.
I haven't been with business I work for long enough to witness it yet.
Okay. Do you think it's happened at Aston Martin? Have departments changed?
I don't want to be the only one speaking, but yeah, it definitely has. We've had a new leadership team.
Yeah.
Lots of the people that were there before, sort of exec-wise, have sort of gone. We've had new people come in. And I think that's definitely impacted the way the rest of the business is structured. Yeah,
that's another really good example. Thank you. Someone's going to come and help you out in a minute, Krishna, because I'm appreciating all your contributions. So don't give up if we don't get anyone else. Let's go quadrant 3. So quadrant 3 is much smaller levels of change. So this is where we're changing group tasks. I'm going to actually ask Tamsin, is this one that you have witnessed? Because even though you've been there in a short period of time, they seem to be evolving, and you talked about changes in shift patterns.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. They've put some of production on shifts, so it's the areas that are quite a lot of bottleneck processes, so it's quite slow to make something. They've put those areas on shifts, but left the other areas alone, and they're still on the shift they used to do. So
I wonder which one that fits in, because it's either going to be group behaviour.
I think there's an overlap, isn't there? Because it's to someone's behaviour, but also to the task as well.
Yeah, to align to the task. Okay. So I suppose with this, what I want to do, just when you're thinking about what needs to be introduced in terms of an organisational development point of view, it's about the level of change. It's about, are we just tweaking? Is it like massive innovation? Is it, what sort of skills do we need from a management point of view to drive it through? So it just gives you a way of classifying what you're suggesting with a sort of a bit of some more academic underpinning. Okay. What I'm going to do, if it's okay, is just carry on with the talk content, but I'll just for the sake of sort of getting the slides nicely, the recordings working well, I will just close it, sort of stop the recording, then start it again. So then I've got like 3 little, because I've got like 3 mini sessions.